Welcome to the CTO Function podcast. I'm PJ Kerner, and my goal here is to help people understand and improve at this technologist role. And it seems to come in so many different forms. I interview all different types of CTOs, and we try and learn from their experiences of building and scaling companies. And I've done this job in different variations for 15 plus years. But when I get together with CTOs, often the conversation goes directly into the tech. But here in this podcast, we're going to talk about the job itself and what skills it takes to do it well. But near the end, we'll dive a little bit into some technology and insights from our guests. So I'd like to welcome Rob Fry, who is currently the CTO at Mezmo, which is a cloud-based observability platform. Some of the insights that Rob talks about in this episode are the importance of the CTO as a bridge builder, specifically between the business and technical side of an organization. You'll also hear him talk about the value of leading teams with trust, respect, and empathy. And you also hear what he has to say about this CTO as the ultimate gap filler, and he'll tell you some more about that. So let's get into the show. All right, Rob. Great having you here. Well, the way I'd like to start off is, tell me a little bit about yourself, right? Your experiences, as a CTO and the places you've kind of done that job.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun. My name's Rob Fry, and been in the technology industry for about 25 years, working anything from utility, internet, media, and business to business enterprise software. Companies like Yahoo, Netflix, different things. As far as the CTO role, I was initially the CTO at a company called Jask, which was a cloud SIM innovator. It was acquired by Sumo Logic back in the day, and then spent several years at an email security startup called ArmorBlocks. And today I'm currently with a cloud data pipeline company called Mezmo.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool that you have these three different perspectives, and I'm sure we'll sort of weave them together. So, I've talked to a number of CTOs, and the one thing I know is there's like 1,000 different ways to CTO. So there's probably now 1,000 ways to this question. It's like, what exactly is a CTO? Like, what do they do in your opinion?
I think the funny response is, when you figure it out, let me know. But I love this question. This is where my head immediately goes. This is always a fun interview question for me when I'm being considered for a CTO role, because the questions you get shows the different interpretations, expectations, and even the biases for what other people think the CTO
tell me more about
should
that.
or shouldn't. Yeah, it's I think some people feel like the CTO, like you should be the best code writer. You should be the most technical person in the company. Others, it's you should be able to pitch the product better than anybody. Many others, it's interesting how they've been influenced. It kind of goes back to what you're saying. There's probably 1,000 different ways to do it, so there's 1,000 different expectations. And so you got to kind of, for me, it was about like meeting as many CTOs and learning all the different ways that CTOs were successful. I still remember meeting you and you coming to Netflix and asking me different types of kind of user experience, expectation type questions. I give you an answer and you flip your laptop around and be like, you mean like this? And I was super impressed by that. And I was like, oh man, if I'm ever a CTO, I want to be able to sit with a customer and do something like that. And then there's all the other CTOs I've sat in. I was kind of brought up with this: if you want to be something, find somebody that you trust and respect, emulate them, earn kind of your respect and your confidence, and develop your own style. And I think that's what I've done over the last 7-8 years, is to kind of emulate other people, get confidence, and then start to develop my own style and what it is to be a CTO.
It's kind of fun to like be doing this kind of show with people. In some ways, giving people this ability to talk to, or through, this video or audio format, like talk to CTOs they might not have been able to, gives them a little bit of that experience. Like you've actually done just a kind of cool ad for, this show, and I share that with you, right? Because like, why am I doing this? Is because that I have that same kind of need to sort of learn from other people and emulate them, understand what they're doing well, and sort of incorporate that into your. And I like having your own your good point about having your own personal take on it. I think that's very important.
I think there's something interesting inside of there. I think from like a simplicity perspective. Way back in the day, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was Vernival's CTO at Amazon. I liked his answer. It's kind of stuck with me. I don't remember when it was. It was a while ago, but it was kind of this. His answer was the CTO. I don't I don't know if this is exact quote, but the CTO is a person who bridges the gap between technology and business and ensures that technology is always aligned to the goals of the organization. And it's like, boom, one sentence simplicity. And while I didn't fully realize it at the time, and it actually really came to smack me in the face later, he used the word technology in there twice. And if you have a technology background, it's like, okay, well, I'm the CTO. This is what we're talking about. It makes sense. But the word I glossed over before I became a CTO, but was actually really important inside of that was the word business. The CTO is the person who bridges the gap between technology and business. And so kind of the answer to your question is, for me, it's like I enjoy startups. Right? Like, you started a startup. Obviously you've gone through the ringer the last I think it's been 10 years. But that for me, it's important context that the CTOs know at larger enterprises and how the world changes as businesses scale. So what I felt in the startup realm is it really kind of depends on the stage. And I think you threw that earlier. I've been doing it in the early and mid stages. And I've run product and engineering, been a pseudo chief architect at the same time, spent a lot of time on the road, the sales team, attended conferences, helped tune customer and sales messaging, owned the patent process, helped shape the company culture. So many things where technical might help, but many times it was more about leadership than technical jobs. And for me, it's like with all that context, for me, the CTO role, where like if I'm mentoring people who are thinking about coming into it, just like I was mentored, it's like, for me, it comes down to leadership. I kind of align with a guy named John Cotter out of Harvard, who's highly regarded on the topic. He's just like, what leaders really do is prepare organizations and the people within them for change and help them cope as they struggle through it. And startups, if you're doing it right, it's all about constant change. But the second one being the ultimate gap filler, finding gaps in what you're doing, currently working on gaps in the things that aren't being worked on, gaps in the team, gaps in the message, just everything. And sure, yeah, technical background for sure. But back to what Werner said, it's like bridge that gap between technology and the business and all the different flavors and variations of what that means for CTO and kind of the startup realm.
So what else? So okay, so that's a great definition, and so I like the idea about building the bridge. And you kind of answered this one. You answered this question kind of in your statement about filling the gaps. Like, what do you think what is meant by building the bridge? Like what? Okay, you know, like
Yeah, I mean there's a. Where do you start with that one? I think
well,
the biggest thing is that you're building a business.
yeah.
I know, I had the opportunity many years ago to start to interface with VCs, and as with my technical background, I wanted to influence decision making on products because I wanted the best products to win. And a lot of those businesses failed. And then I realized it's not about building the best technology; it's about building the best business. And that really, like, I didn't learn that for many years after that because I was a technical person. On the flip side of that is the business side who doesn't understand the technology. They know that they want to make revenue. They know they want to build a business, but they don't know enough about the technology, the customer challenges. That's kind of your role. That's where you came from. And so being able to explain to them more so in business language than technical language, and it could be for a sales pitch. Like I love going. I hope my CRO doesn't watch this because I haven't done much with my sales team yet. But usually, what they see is I go in and I talk to customers. I know how to talk their language. and I say and I do different things than what's inside of their slide deck or what's inside of their sales pitch, and then they see how the customer responds, right? And so you're again, you're building that bridge. So it's the marketing side, right? Like they're talking to analysts. Analysts are influenced by customers, but they might not have a technical background. So they hear something from a customer, they make an interpretation, and now customers are buying it based off the analyst rather than. And so now you need to help the marketing team influence an analyst. It's that business side, I think, is it's where I focused a lot the last 7 years because it was where all of my pain was.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I like the analyst comment as well. That's an interesting insight. It's an interesting insight in that they do bridge things between customers and the product teams, but the technical angle in there potentially missing at times is a problem. It's a good gap to fill. Right, back to your point. So what are the kind of skills do you think CTOs need to have to be good at? And you've answered this already, really, in a few ways. But what else do you think?
I think, I mean, the skills. Another good question. Another this one might have some hair on it, but I think, and I would break this down probably 4 or 5 different buckets, and like coming into a company or even starting one as you're building a team. Like one of the first ones you start with is trust and respect. I think a CTO that can't earn trust and respect of the engineering team, the product team, like
Yep.
what are you going to do after that? I think second one is being empathetic, probably listening with empathy. Um, I think it's almost as important as the first. And this kind of reaches back to even the business. I became a better CTO when I spent a not insignificant amount of time listening to and understanding the roles, the challenges, and the impacts of sales, marketing, and product. Uh, you know, what was all this tension and learning how a decision in one could have implications and impacts and downward pressure on the others, and then being able to use empathy to facilitate conversations between any combination of the previous to create understanding and empathy within them. And then there's always going to be, I thought initially I could solve the tension, but then I realized that there's always going to be tension between these teams. And as an executive, it's kind of your job to ensure that the tension is normal, healthy type. And so that listening empathy is important as a skill. And third is an understanding of the technology, but not just from a nuts and bolts perspective. Again, making it explainable to others, technical and non-technical. I would throw, with that one being the third one, I'd probably throw in being good with analogies. So like a 3B to that would be being able to use analogies to create visualizations in other people's heads so that they can relate to the challenges of technology without necessarily jumping into nuts and bolts. And then the last two, which really resonate with me with the current job, is being able to see the big picture, market, the product, the customer, the problems, the technology, and then how they'll bend and work in the future. Then have the skills to develop a vision, which has aspirations but isn't too aspirational. I think this is a challenge for some CTOs. A lot of technical people is they get too aspirational. Um, but what you need to come up with is a vision which is grounded in the day-to-day details of how the technology is going to be used to solve customer problems. And then lastly, in the CTO position, you have really unique optics. Maybe visibility is a better word. And using the internal external visibility of the CTO position to create strategy being the last one, and both the short-term and long-term capacity for goal building that aligns to the business and the different teams and what they're trying to accomplish. So I think that those 5 would be the things I would say from skills or what I found to be important.
Yeah, I think what's interesting in listening to you as you sort of talk and talking to what you said before is a lot of those skills are in like trying to build like they're trying to build bridges. They're in in that aligned with that kind of goal, right? So building trust, having empathy, like having that vision. You're trying to take people on that journey. Maybe they're a little bit scared to go across the bridge, right? There's a metaphor there.
Oh yeah, they might not see it that way. That the biases that's always been interesting to me is cognitive bias in these situations. Their past experiences, good, bad, the scar tissue that they have, and that empathy. Uh, it can be difficult because you might be coming in situations where people, especially because of the CTO role, like that might have been an adversarial in a previous job. And so I say it, and it sounds really cool, maybe. I don't know. But the application of it is really hard. Like that it's there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of frustration. It's not necessarily easy, which is why it's a skill. If it was easy, it wouldn't be a skill. I would do it, but it is something that you have to develop.
What? So something interesting I was thinking as you're talking there. It's like, I mean, building bridges does require a partnership, right? Like, and you point about the adversarial part. I could imagine at some point having somebody on the. Well, I hope to have somebody on who maybe lived that role, because there'd be something good to learn at a sort of what happens, or maybe what dysfunction there is in that. But um, there has to be somebody on the other side who wants to go across the bridge with you or meet you halfway, or something. Um,
Yeah, I think inside of this you have to understand people's motivations and what they're trying to achieve, and aligning the bridge building to not. I think this is like a really good skill for product managers. Like the best CTOs I've ever met are the ones that never say no, and they're able to. They're usually masters of communication. I won't say them a master of communication, but like trying to actually understand. Like I'm an SE, I'm getting just beat every day, and if you do this one thing for me, it'll make customers happy. It'll make my life easy. Like that's a everyday motivation for an SE. But that might be at odds with prioritization and engineering. And so now, like, you got to find some type of middle ground there. And it might be an expectation around delivery. It might be inviting them to see how the sausage is made. And that thing that they think is easy is actually really hard. And it's exposing them to both sides of the equation. And the same thing goes for engineers, right? Like, hey, sometimes you have to suck it up. Like, go build that thing. And they're not wrong. And it can't be a one way conversation. I'm not the CTO coming in explaining to you why engineering is having difficulty with what you're asking. It's got to be coming back to engineering and saying, no, they're actually right. And the business needs this. It's not about the challenge, it's in engineering. And trying to be, everybody's biased, trying to come at it in an empathetic way to be as unbiased as possible, but understanding both sides as much as possible as well.
yeah, there's a kind of seeking truth aspect to sort of what you're saying. I think that's valuable. I've had a similar experience when people understand, like, people make decisions on ROI. Business people make decisions on ROI, and sometimes people, and I've had the ability to sometimes point out the increased R, right, the increased return on that, or sometimes point out there's another way, so that decreases the I, right, like and you can play either side of that kind of equation, and provide some insights, and that does change how you approach a problem, and maybe gets a no to a yes, right? Maybe back to your point about how do you get to say yes all the time? I mean, you can't just say yes to everything. You have to there's balances and priorities, but that's like that truth there and that understanding can help. Um,
Yeah, I think one of the things I heard in what you're saying is, and it really comes to the healthy tension, right? Like, been in startups where there's unhealthy tension, and all I want to do is get back to healthy tension. Now, healthy tension has, a little bit of a different spin on it. To me, healthy tension would be a debated executive team around a product feature and whether we should do it for a customer. And maybe there's 500 or a million in revenue. I'm sure you have these conversations like all CTOs, and what that would do to roadmap, what that would do to engineering morale, but on the other side, what it would help sales side, current customer, next customer, this other type of stuff. So it's listening, empathy, understanding both sides, and then negotiating to some type of middle ground. But also, I mean, eventually somebody's got to make a tough choice, and then hopefully you've earned trust and respect in order to be one of the people that's making that decision, delivering it, and maybe understanding, hey, the next time we heard you, it didn't go your way. We're going to continue to have these conversations, and people want to be listened to. I think that's one of the big challenges, especially on the sales side that I've seen, is they don't always feel like they're being listened to. Right? Engineers feel that way because they're just treated like short order cooks. They want to be. I want to hear what the customer's saying. I want to hear this and all that type of stuff. And that negotiation, that communication, trying to be an intermediary inside of that, I think is really important for the CTO role.
No, I agree. So, my next question, I'm going to change topic a little bit because I'm curious now because we've talked a lot about the building those bridges. Like, there's this idea of how broad you need to be in your kind of experiences, right? And versus how deep you need to be. And I'm kind of curious where you sort of like live on that sort of, spectrum.
Oh man, I won't say I was ever the most technical person. I always felt like I could hold my own. I don't ever felt like I would get into a conversation and just be over my skis. But I mean, high level, I think a good CTO should have uh, deep technical expertise, at least one or as many areas related to the product and business, while also having a broad understanding of a wide range of technologies and trends, and as it relates to business model. Um, I think if you jump down a level, the organization's success with the product that they're building should be related directly to the CTO's expertise. I've seen CTOs who are highly proficient with like on-prem, for instance, who became CTOs of cloud-based companies. This was something that was happening a lot over the last decade or so. And they struggled because the expertise needed for cloud and the significant differences in architecture tool patterns and anti-patterns, even team design for one versus the other is very different. And it's it also goes with as a CTO, if you understand that, it also goes to help building trust and respect with regard to interacting with the team, having a good understanding of the tech and the engineering challenges related to the decision making impacts different decisions have as they come up as a CTO. If you can articulate well why you should or should not do something because of that technical expertise, not necessarily having even to understand the nuts and bolts as more of what's the outcome, what's the goal, goes a long way to earning and keeping that trust. But at the same time, while I've known and I think probably known too, the CTO brainiac types that are just good at everything. They're probably CTO for 10, 15 years and they still write code and do all these things. But I think the majority of us are more successful with breadth and finding depth in our people. CTO can't be a single point of failure. I've seen that mistake before. You gotta find and hire people that are better than you at everything technical as a goal of a CTO, while you're still keeping your fingers on the pulse. But again, to bridge the gap between the technology and the business, I don't think you can maintain the technical expertise, nor should you, because you really should be building a team that can do that for you, that provides you that information in an understandable way, so that you can go back to the bridge building.
No, and I think that is like why I asked this question is like, and you answered it very well. Is like this is the balance point, right? Like, what is the like? Because if you're, as you just said, is if you're too much in the weeds, then you might be not spending enough time in that bridge building. So you have to find this right shape. I think if I try and recall exactly the word you said, it's like hold your own. You like that. Like I think you
hold your own.
And tell me a little like what would define, because in some ways okay, if I'm interpreting what you're saying is if you can hold your own, like that's the line, like that should be the line. Like if you're like, but what does it mean to hold your own?
Yeah, it's something I've actually been doing here recently. So one of my expertise is cloud. I'm not a Kafka expert, but I built enough cloud-based data pipelines that were SaaSes or whatever to know to go to my current team who's struggling with Kafka and be like, guess what? It's going to get more challenging in the future. Why? Because you can't come up with a Zookeeper configuration for all the different use cases we're going to see in the future. Let's talk about a 3-tier design pattern. So I understand that. I've lived it. Could I go do it today? I mean, yeah, I'm sure if you demoted me and made me an IC, I'll go figure it out. But this is where experience comes in, right? Like having been there and understanding it, having then built and led teams who dealt with it, learning from those experiences, and then coming into new situations to predict what's going to happen in the future. It earns you credibility, earns you respect, earns you trust. But it's not that you're doing the work; they still have to go do the work, and every product is different. And I literally can't solve all those problems for them as much as I can lead them to let them know what's coming kind of down the road based off of that expertise and experience. Another one that kind of pops in my head. This is like an interview question. How much code you going to write? And I'm just like, none. Why? Do you really want to do the check on my PR? I've seen CEOs that still write code, right? It's like, who's going to do the PR when he puts that in there? And who's going to tell him no, right? I see that as an anti-pattern to where that's not, I don't think, maybe in the early days for sure, right? Like you got less than 5, 10 employees on the engineering side, yeah, go write code. But eventually you have to abstract your way out of there just because it creates too much noise. But you still need to be able to leverage your experience. You still need to be able to leverage that knowledge to guide people that either, especially if they don't know. I think so, you can't assume that they always know, and you just need to be able to bring these conversations up in a way that's non-threatening to them. Hey, you guys doing this? Cool. I've seen this in the past. What are you guys doing? And it's just a conversation, and then I think that goes a long way to kind of trust and respect too.
I will say one thing in my career is if I look at that is so I've found that on that depth side is I totally agree with you. Like you maybe spend you might be too deep, then you sort of pop up, and if you get too shallow, right, you need to go back deep. And I've been fine with at least with kind of not having a straight line on the depth, but like kind of going back and forth, maybe across an average, like that line that maybe you're sort of talking, and at times having to dig back in a little bit further to maybe get some of that credibility or just get the hands sturdy again with something. Because if you stay out of it too much, then maybe that trust goes. That you don't have the trust, you don't have the knowledge, and so on. So I found this a non-stable state for me personally, like sort of going back and forth between those things, and mostly it's around new. So it's around the new thing, right? It's like I wanna try the new thing, and I need to, and then I pop back up right to above maybe that line. It's
You
an
always could be
interesting
learning.
pattern for me.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think for me, like coming from Netflix, we just AWS, and then I go to a startup or GCP, and my entire world just turned upside down. I love Dynamo, I love S3. Okay, BigQuery, what's that? You gotta go learn. Containers came out. There's all sorts of different flavors. Thankfully, we all settled on Kate's, which is great, but you still had to go learn. And it wasn't the easiest thing to learn, but in order to be relevant in the future and have those conversations with engineers to guide decision making, you don't have to go in and understand, you know, how many topics can you put inside of something like Docker? How many nodes? I actually know what those are because I've seen my teams run into those limitations, which is great. But it's not something that I don't think, to your point, like you dive in, get the knowledge, you associate it with past knowledge, and I think it's just engineering. It's patterns and anti-patterns. It's you're looking for the patterns in the data in order to be able to apply it to the thing, and I think that good CTOs know how to do that.
Yeah, and I think I always look for. And I'm kind of jumping to the next question again, or answering a little bit, but I always look for like the anti patterns more than I look for the like people see the patterns. In fact, people overfit the patterns. It's if you tell me a good anti pattern, I feel you know the tech better, right? And that's a bit of a framework I sort of use to understand people and understand technology. But
I did that coming into Mezmo. It was an interesting because they were initially kind of on-prem and they moved cloud. And they had no cloud. I like cloud. Talking with VP and some of the other people, and I'm just like, tell me about your how you're doing horizontal scale, any challenges you're having. And I'm not there to crucify. I'm there to learn maturity.
Hmm.
And what I'm looking for is to try and figure out what it is in order to be able to insert like guidance around patterns. And while they had it, not everybody has customer isolation right off the bat. That can be a difficult thing to solve. Horizontal scale concept is easy, but it's 9 a.m. in the morning and things are coming in at 100x the rate of what they're usually doing through the rest of the week. How are you going to horizontally scale? And not everybody nails that right off the bat. So for me, it was like this really good bar based off of past experience to come in to ask a question, understand where the team was at, in order to be able to level something myself, in order to have a conversation with them, and again to kind of plan like, all right, how are we gonna solve this, or what's actually being done.
Yeah. So my next question, and maybe you're again answering it, is like, what philosophies or frameworks do you kind of use to do your job? Any kind of insights? And you've provided a few already. So, um,
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and uh, it's heavily influenced by my time at Yahoo, and then going to Netflix,
okay.
and it dances around kind of agile. I'm not sure I would call it agile, but I saw how iteration could be a defensible mode at Netflix. When I showed up there a long, long time ago, engineering was doing about 100 production code pushes per day, which was just insane. I thought that was just crazy. And then 8 years later, when I left, I think we were doing over 3,000. And so it was like agile, maybe agile on steroids. I just think of it as iteration to win, and whoever iterates faster wins. And so I don't know if there's a term for that, but I know from a philosophy perspective, if I'm going into SaaS, is I can out iterate the on-prem guys pretty easy, and then it's can I out iterate the competition, which is what we did at Netflix. So that's one thing I want to bring. Another one would be, especially for cloud-based products, is not siloing teams to make sure team design aligns to the product building, which at a high level means having typically smaller teams that architect, code, build, deploy, assess, and our own code on call for what they build. And it's been my experience, at least with that type of team design, that ownership and empowerment is higher. Mistakes are lower because you or someone on your team is going to be on call. So it creates this internal team accountability and really eliminates, or at least alleviates this type of team design, many challenges associated with other development type frameworks. So I don't like to call it DevOps. I'm not a fan of that term. It has too many definitions. I think of it more as kind of like service based team design. And then the last one I like is I'm big on design thinking, not treating engineers like short order cooks, but having them heavily involved and deeply thinking about the customer problem. It's not just a feature, it's a customer problem. What does it look like in the next sprint, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, doing rapid prototypes on a whiteboard, dozens, even more, before even writing a single line of code, to have as much of an understanding of who the solution is for, and how the tech is going to be used. Which, a lot of this is easier said than done, but I think if for that type of product, uh, those three things are really critical to success, in my opinion.
Yeah, I very much like I haven't heard I've heard people talk about the importance of agile, but like being agile to win, like the who iterates faster is the winner. That's a interesting. That's definitely an interesting way to think about it. For sure,
There's
it's kind
limits.
of
I mean, Netflix was consumer, right? And that gives you the freedom to do 3,000. And you can't do that in the enterprise, but if your competition is doing 5 per day and you're doing 20, that was the beautiful thing about Netflix even today, is they're so far ahead from a technology perspective that other people won't necessarily be able to keep up with their ability to scale globally. And then, like, if you take that now you apply it to enterprise, business to business, as long as you're out iterating your competition, if they have something you don't, then your ability to catch up is high. If you have something they don't, then your ability to keep a lead is high.
yeah.
And as long as you run with that, that should be a definitely defensible mode.
Well, I definitely think it feeds also with your other point about. So, I mean, seen the, you run it, sorry, you build it, you run it, you secure it, right? To sort of to not say DevSecOps, but unfortunately, right? But when somebody has aligned priorities, right? I built something, I run it in production. I'm responsible for that, and I'm responsible for the security of that. Those align priorities. I think they come from they come out of also being agile. That agile environment sort of facilitates those aligned priorities. I think because you can't if you're pushing it all the way to production. Well, guess what? It's running in a few minutes, and if it breaks in a few minutes, and you're on it.
Yeah,
So
software engineers. I think if you're a good software engineer, right, like the ability to, we're going to treat you like an adult. You own this. This is your product. But from birth to death, like this is yours. And I think a lot of software engineers, they don't feel that connectedness with on-prem because it's such a big freaking playground where everybody's inside of there. And your piece might be small or it's owned by somebody else, but when you get into service-based design, you literally can own something. And you need to know who you're a customer of and who your customers are. But that thing that you own is yours.
yeah, I think it's interesting. I have this philosophy around um, they're accountability. Yeah, is accountability is if you make a mistake, you are responsible for fixing it. Because too often you make a mistake, especially if you too much separate dev and ops. It's like, well, I don't have good I didn't put enough hooks in my software to do good monitoring because somebody else needs to do the monitoring is going to is going to take the hours of their time, right? You have somebody else pay for your mistakes, and I think thinking about it like I'm gonna pay for my own mistakes and owning those things makes a better product, makes a better service. So and why I said that is because it ties back to your point about when you deliver software, you're delivering software to another organization and somebody else. It's truly somebody else's organization whose job to operate it, and you're too disconnected from those things. It's hard to get that alignment. So in a service-based thing, you have the ability to have that alignment.
Something interesting inside of that is, and going back to kind of breadth and depth, and this more ties to as a leader knowing how to build teams is, in the early stages, you're going to have somebody that's working in the code base. And then as the team gets bigger, you're going to start to put teams into services. And, cloud-based architectures are intentionally sophisticated, i.e. complicated. But you need somebody that knows everything in order to be able to connect the dots, like when you're doing planning. I'm going to do this with my service. Hey, have you go talk to that team? Hey, do you know what's happening with the team that's upstream? And so this is where it's like, it's not just about the CTO, it's also about instilling that breadth of depth into the team, baking it into the process so that you have these people that go super deep on their service, but then you have the people that have the breadth of how everything works because they've been there for a while in order to facilitate those conversations. And teams that don't do that or companies that haven't do that, they usually have issues because the product is constantly breaking. They can't iterate at a high rate because people always stomping on each other.
Well, I mean, I think your point is companies who don't think about that. If you don't think about that as a kind of a framework, then you don't do it, and then you sort of don't have those people, and you sort of break. But so this goes to my one more question, which is like how do you build a good team? Okay, and I'm gonna I want to call it for the office of the CTO in the sense that sometimes CTOs have true R&D engineers under them, but what do you what makes a good team member? What makes a good hire for the office of the CTO? People who report to you, helping you with your job, right?
So separate from the engineering team and the day to day, somebody that's more focused on CTO type.
Separated from that, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely I think a negotiation that happens typically with the product team, VP of engineering. What you don't want to be is someplace that is kind of a black project where we're going to go invent something and throw it back to the engineering team to go implement. I like to talk with the VP of engineering in order to kind of rotate people in. Be a software engineer, you're going to get burnt on things. If you're a really good engineer, let's bring them in. It might be advantageous for the career development. Learning a new technology that nobody else knows about might be hard to hire for. That's a common problem in the industry. But you also still want to have subject matter experts people who have a history with technology and an understanding of, I don't care that this open source project's been out for 3 to 6 months and it's the next greatest thing. Like, it ain't about cool. It's not about the shiny things. It's about understanding the business, understanding the product, and bringing things to the forefront that are going to help us. We had this really good at Netflix. We would also, hire these really smart people. Somebody directly from IBM who was one of the committers to Docker, because we saw the potential what containers could do because of the internal challenges we had around building development environments for software engineers, but also for capabilities of what it could do for us to be able to take our compute utilization from like 85% and jack it way up. So it was also a business thing. So having people that are dedicated inside of that to kind of help that guide that decision making without excluding product or the engineering work, and kind of partnering with them in order to bring people in where resources are needed, in order to say, hey, we need to either rapid prototype this, or maybe it's a longer term thing, and giving other people that opportunity, and rather than just having like this dedicated black ops team that is just going to do all sorts of stuff. I've seen that fail a lot. Different companies. We had that at seen it at Google, seen it at Yahoo. We had this special building where people would go off and do that under something like the Office of the CTO. And I don't remember anything that actually came out of that ever provided a lot of value to the business. So for me, it was more about kind of crossing those lines.
I mean, I think what if I was to, come back what you're saying. I mean, there's the communication aspect. Whoever's in this kind of role needs to be a good communicator. I think it ties back to what you said before about building bridges. They're going to build bridges at different levels, right? Maybe below you, but they need to be do that same thing, right? So follow that same philosophy. It is interesting. You then did say like some kind of subject matter experts. So there's a kind of a depth versus breadth there thing. Also, I heard in your, like, sometimes it's about breadth, sometimes maybe it is about depth in an area that you might sort of need, and obviously that could sort of change as your business changes. Anything else on the good hire side?
Last comment. It's really, I mean, you have to understand the business as a CTO, and when you're setting up that team, it's really, where I'm in a business right now building cloud-based data pipelines. Okay, cool. Well, we know a large part of that's going to be Kafka. All right, cool. What's happening with Kafka? Better go know. Might want to go set up time with the cloud computing alliances. What are they talking about? And it's not always about technology and implementing it. A lot of it is relationships. That was always one of my superpowers of networking and being involved with what's going on at Johns Hopkins, being involved with what's happening in these other tech companies, and making sure that you have optics on, holy crap, like they solve something, and that problem is our problem. And it's not about what's cool. It's about like understanding your business and how that relates to other businesses and other even research that's going on out there, and making sure that you understand when to bring that in and when it can be solved. And is it a next year thing? Is it a 3-year thing? And starting to create the horizons around kind of that product vision and how it's going to align to the problem you're trying to solve.
So let's change gears again. From like, how does your organization, the others, right, in your organization, sort of measure your success? Like, what would they say? What would they say? Not what would you say a good CTO? What would they say they get out of that? Like here, another related question is simply like, if you pick 2 key functions just to use as examples, is like, what are they, and what do you give them? Like, like, what do you give your sales team or your marketing team or your like those 2 questions go kind of hand in hand.
This feels kind of like an eternal question, right? It's definitely, I think, answered different ways by different people. So, you say CRO, revenue, right? But it could be stage dependent as well. There might be an element to that. You get to CTO, product delivery, say do ratio, features delivered. I think some of it you gotta break down to team building, morale, retention, types of things that show your ability to lead and build a team. But then you're in the business to build a business. So I think the perspective is it might potentially be similar to the CRO in that it's partially based off of team execution and delivery, but the added dimension being a shared responsibility between product and engineering, delivering product value, potentially expressed as a metric as potentially like TTV. How easy is it for your product to be? How soon does the customer see value? I think an engineer's CTO has influence on product or feature usage metrics. You guys built a feature. It's SaaS. It's one of the great things of SaaS. Who's using it? Potentially even revenue related directly to product value. If we say this, is of high value, say it has like a new SKU with it, are we actually making revenue off of it? And if not, why not? And I think the CTO could be partially held responsible for some of that.
What? No, that makes sense. What can I like? So a lot of those were okay. I'll say product, and I'll say internal facing things. What is what? So another thing I ask is like this internal versus external balance for the CTO, right? And you've answered it a little bit in interesting ways about like, okay, if you need to know about Kafka, well, you need to go talk to the people who are like building Kafka and like understand what the community is doing with Kafka, and that's clearly an external sort of part of that, like knowledge. But how do you sort of see the internal external balance for the CTO?
Yeah, this was an interesting one for me as I was building relationships with CTOs, and it was very also stage dependent. I think what you need in a CTO in the early stages is very different as you start to hit product market fit. And what I saw, and even what I was approached by companies for, was in the early stages technical is fine, but eventually that CTO needs to be external. They need to talk to a whole host of different people. Could be the media, could be a conference, like that, especially their co-founder, right? But I not technical people, and this I relate with this. Like I was extreme introvert. A lot of us on the technical side, we tend to skew very heavily towards introvert, and I was kind of mentored into go speak, go talk. And while that was a hard transition, not everybody can make that, but the business needs it. I think if you get to like a CTO of Carbon Black is a friend of mine, right? Like highly technical guy, very just smart. CTO of Carbon Black, they don't need that. That's not your role anymore, right? And I think if you have that dichotomy of co-founder all the way to you've gone IPO, you're a public enterprise CTO, those skill sets are total different ends of the spectrum. So for me, it's I try and work on both. Say I'm perfect with analysts. I'm very opinionated, and sometimes they don't like that. Okay, like I should work on that. But I do public speaking pretty well, right? Internally, I try and do it pretty well. But I think as you get later and later stages, also because the org grows larger, you're going to be less and less involved per se with some of the technology. It really does more towards a business CTO position, and I think that's where I've kind of focused. Like I want to get on that startup where, yeah, thanks for using my technical background. I want to help the business. I don't want to be that really great technology that fails. I want to be a business builder and understand from a CTO perspective. Being known as a business CTO, I don't think is a bad thing. And so brushing up on your business skills as the company matures, I think is definitely the right way to go.
No, that's interesting. Um, it's interesting in that kind of internal. I can imagine sort of as I do more of these interviews, like creating a little scale of internal versus external, and maybe that mapping to that to time life of a company, right? And
I really want to turn this question around on you because I think it's been about 10 years since I met you, and you were technical co-founder. And now, I mean, I'm jealous. I'll admit, I want to be you. You're $2 billion corporation, $500 million fund raised, and you've gone through this. Like, what's your answer? Curious.
um, I mean, it aligns with what I just said in that. each phase of a company, right, needs a different type of CTO, right? I do have a friend who kind of runs around in the A and B round of CTOs, and he sort of says, like, I don't go past, like, he doesn't go past that, right? Because he doesn't like, right, and he knows where his sweet spot is of that phase of the company, right? And the people buy into it. He's very successful in that area. I will say on the flip side, like, I have watched people go too long, like go past their kind of sort of sweet spot, and they need sort of like they don't maybe have the self awareness that they're beyond their beyond that time, right? But I think one thing that helps, if I was to sort of pull out that skill to be able to go for a while, is that self awareness, that ability to sort of understand where you are, understand what the business needs, and adapt to that, right? Like, and so that's that, like being adaptable, and knowing what you need, and having those conversations with those peers, like, is important. So,
Love it. Love it.
so another I think there's another set of people out there listening that is like are aspiring CTOs, and like tell me, like, if I was to, like, where do CTOs come from? Like, where are they? Like, and in your experience, like, what do they like? I mean, and I'm sure there's multiple paths. That's why I'm asking multiple people. Like, where do they come from?
I think if you're gonna say that the obvious answer is working your way up through engineering. CTOs, I think a lot of times typically come from engineering, maybe some exceptions. And for me, it's funny. This is it's resonating with me because as I was transitioning, I had a VC friend of mine was getting advice from, and he was like, "Rob, your career path will appear asymmetrical to many companies. Might not appear to follow the typical career trajectory, and to not waste time trying to convince those companies otherwise. You need to seek opportunities with teams and people who see value in varied and
That
diverse
asymmetrical
background
sort of.
while leveraging. But there's a lot of companies out there that want symmetry. You were an intern, you were junior, you worked your way, level one, level two, level three, staff, architect, chief architect, CTO. Which if you were to create maybe a diagram, maybe that's what it would look like. So it wasn't my career path. I'm opportunistic. That's why my career was asymmetrical. I learned COBOL to work on mainframes back in the Y2K late 90s. I did networking, cloud, security. I just wanted to learn everything. So my career didn't follow that typical intern, junior, senior type stuff. But I also think it's my diversity, my depth in certain areas that made me valuable, which eventually led to my CTO role.
But I like that insight about I mean, they come from different ways, and like this is another self awareness thing. Know who you are, right? Know who you are, and
Know
know
your
what
value.
strengths you have, and own that, and then find an organization that values that, right? Like,
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's probably the best advice there. If somebody was aspiring to be one.
Yeah.
So the counter one is like, what does CTOs do next? Like, once you've been one, what do you do?
It's funny. I was having this. I actually have this conversation frequently with either people I mentor or people on my team, and usually the conversation comes up of I want to be in that meeting, and I remember being that person. I want to be in that meeting because I thought, well, if I'm in that meeting, that's where the decisions are made. And then you get into that meeting, you realize, wait, there's another meeting, then there's another meeting, and then you're a CTO and you're still in the meeting, and uh, just same meeting, different flavor, right? And so for me, um, as you start to think about that, like uh, there's people like you that if you've had the success like what you've had at Illumio, like you retire on a beach somewhere after the IPO. Like, I think that's definitely one play that could definitely a trajectory that you go. But I think about this question a bit as I get further into the second half of my career, and I think of my old CTO at Netflix, Neil Hunt. He transitioned while I was at Netflix from the CTO to the CPO, and I didn't quite understand that at the time. But I do see some CTOs transitioning to CPO roles, and I see some of the traction. CPO controls nothing, but is at the center of everything, focal point for engineering, but also important marketing, sales, and that's interesting. Like you're getting even more heavily involved in the business side and not just the technical. But I'm spending quite a bit of time with my CTO mentors because I think CTO is another landing spot. I really like Satya Nadella at Microsoft. He is one sharp CEO. And while I don't think he officially had the CTO title, I'd argue that he had a very similar role. I was at Microsoft, and so I think another one that pops to mind is Max Levchin, the CEO of a firm, but was the co-founder CTO of PayPal. So I think I think those people they learn one side of the business and they're really good at it, but as they become the business CTO, then if they're still wanting to be more involved, and then ultimately like the ultimate decision maker, which I think a lot of us want, then definitely that CEO role looks good. But also there's the flip side of that of others I've seen go to the chief architect side. Maybe they miss or they just like the technical side just too much. And maybe they care less about the business side. And so they drift into technical leadership like the chief architect. I think that's one of the eternal questions in startup is, do you have a chief architect, a CTO, or VP of engineering? Figure that out and then put them in the right spot and then hire for the other spots. But I not as often, but I do see CTOs that end up drifting into the chief architect position as well.
Yeah, I think I want to as I do more of these interviews, I want to get a few people who are former CTOs and kind of ask them the same question and
All
sort
right.
of because as you and I are both in the job, so like that's a little bit further beyond that.
Just the insight that they would have. Yeah, I did this. Here's all the bad stuff. The great things. Here's what I wasn't like. All the things I didn't expect as a CTO that I know now. Like
Here's why
having
I
somebody
miss
who
it,
was there.
and here's why and here's why I
Right.
don't. Right,
That'd
like
be so great. I'd watch that.
so um, do you, another thing I'm trying to like talk to more people. It's like they're trying to develop some kind of taxonomy, and I mean you've brought in the idea of the business CTO. I will tell you that I saw somebody on LinkedIn who wrote hands-on CTO, like, and they clearly felt that in their profile they needed to say hands-on CTO, and I'll I'll posit that there are, and you've sort of mentioned, there are people who have gone too far to that CTO that I'll call in the chief talking officer kind of role. And they probably wanted to sort of, by saying hands on, they wanted to separate themselves from that kind of person. But that was a curious thing. Any other types of CTOs? If you were to sort of put a word in front of a CTO to sort of say the different flavors, I guess. Because I mean, you've already given me one today. The like that there's that business CTO, and I think that's a kind of flavor. I think it's an important like not that anybody is not that. I think is part of your point, but there is um, people are a little bit more technical versus business savvy. That's a dimension of the problem. But
Yeah, that's a spectrum. I think you'd have like the visionary thought leader CTO, somebody who's just so far ahead of everybody
sure,
else, and nobody understands what they're talking about. But then they go and execute, and then boom, they're the next big company. So that visionary thought leader CTO, I think, is important. That's pretty rare, but it definitely exists out there. Uh, I mean, I've seen there's the non-technical CTO. Like it does exist. Uh, it's not common, but
what is
I've
that?
somebody who comes from the business. Let's say I mean, like I've seen CISOs become CTOs, and they potentially don't have they're more of a business or an operations background than a technical background. But it's there's and like I'm not here to like mention names and get into kerfuffle or anything like that about whether it's right or wrong. But there is this idea of people from the business side coming into the technical world because it's a leadership position, right? Like ultimately, if it's later stage and you have a really strong technical team, maybe what they need is leadership more so than they need technical leadership. And so I could see that happen as well, and I have.
Yeah.
So but it's
I personally want to talk to all the different flavors. It's because I always think there's something to learn, like, from all different kind of points of view. So
the evangelist. You didn't mention that one. The evangelist CTO, and
evangelist.
that going back to like taxonomies. What's been interesting last 5-8 years? Office of the CTO, field CTO. I think the first time I saw this was Palo Alto Networks. They needed a cloud CTO, and I was like, "Well, what's Near going to do?" And they're like, no, it's not the CTO role." And I was like, "Oh, what does it actually do?" But then they had like field CISOs, and you're starting to see this. It's not just the CTO role; it's the CISO and the CTO role, where it's sharing of a responsibility of the internal and external, and you can't be everywhere all at once and all this other type of stuff. So I think you see that as well.
Oh, interesting. I know the field CTO role. I haven't seen the field CISO role. I totally have seen people talking about that concept, but I totally buy that. I'm not paying attention to that title, so but that makes perfect sense.
Throwing in some of my security background.
Yeah. So here let's because we're probably getting near the end. Let's talk a little bit about technology for a second. So where do you think? What is the technology space that you think's undergoing a significant amount of change? Like something that's really changing, and like what's driving that change? And the third one is what challenges are coming out of that change. That's the kind of
that second part is interesting. So, I mean, you can't help it, but I'm going to say it. It's going to sound kind of buzzy, but I'll get into the explanation, right? So, the bunny answer, I think, right now with everything going on in its current age is something like ChatGPT. And I like the AI space around natural language processing and understanding. I had decent exposure to this at Armor Blocks. It was really fun because I spent, I don't know how many years working with security startups that were all AI, and it was really hard. And the reason why, and it really hit me in the face with something like NLP and NLU, was there's not an established baseline for how to do it for security. But you look into the natural language processing, there's models, there's training data, there's things that it just works. And it works because the algorithm is specifically written for the data. So going into something like Armor Blocks, where like I showed up and it's like, we do machine learning. Yeah, shut up. And it worked. And I was like, "Holy crap, like, this is amazing." And then you start to learn about, you start to investigate because you're CTO, like what are all the use cases for this? And then you realize how many academics are working, how many enterprises are working on it, how many things are open source, and then what are the things that it's solving. And so I think that space, and we're seeing it right now, but I don't think we've fully even recognized it. Like it's more than just a screen. You type things in and it talks back to you. Like your ability to actually influence. And this gets into the downside too. There's an interesting question I saw it on LinkedIn. It's like, okay, cool. This whole AI thing is interesting. What's the downside? It's like, well, for every good thing it can do, having studied adversaries in the past, there's 10 things that could go wrong with it. So you get into propaganda. We've seen a lot of this in the last 8-9 years. It can be used for some serious malicious stuff. The reports that are coming in from different organizations, agencies around how it can be used for imitation, influence, all sorts of crazy stuff. It's already there. They were probably doing it even before these things became popular. So it's the evil side of it's definitely there for sure. On sorry, you're gonna say something?
One thing I was reading this other article about how what's possibly challenging is like the confidence of a single voice, like sort of talking at you, right? And that because it's so human and specific, provides examples, it could be way more convincing than it actually should be, right? And that's a scary thing. So yeah, I was just echoing. It was interesting because they were talking about the confidence of the voice of ChatGPT as a potential challenge or risk. So, and sorry I interrupted you.
No, I think the two other ones that popped in my mind when you asked that question was I like the innovations and movements kind of around kind of cloud space perspective. I don't think we've quite seen the full potential of something like 5G and edge compute, and it's got a lot of buzzworthiness right now, all the hype cycle stuff. But I recently had insight into a company called Macrometa in that space, and it's really impressive how they think about compute data pipelines. And it's something it's not like AWS where it's regional. Like they're already thinking global. And the problems that they could solve with moving that to the edge as kind of a new pattern that as a platform where they provide you a construct to work with rather than AWS where it's more of a canvas, a blank slate. You got to go put it all together. And so I think it's definitely different than what we've seen from the last 10, 15 years. And so I think we'll see a lot of there over the next 3 to 5. The last one would be personal favorite, and I spent a lot of time on it in the past, is VRAR. Uh, the design principles are still developing on how to build functional interfaces, but the problem set that they could aid in. There's one of my connections that's doing it for healthcare, which I think is a fantastic use case, and you've probably seen some of the commercials on TV around that. But I think that one is in the immature stages. It's infancy, and once they figure out design principle about how to properly use it, it's not going to make you get sick, but actually is useful. I think that will be super interesting as well.
That is interesting. Can I go back to the edge one for 1 second? Because
Yeah.
I was watching this. I was talking with the CTO about uh, design. Like they were worried about saving money at the end of the day, right? And one way to save money is you introduce design constraints, right? And so they were able to accelerate their application development by giving them people less choice, right? And in this environment, right? I'm not saying that's good in all environments. Sometimes you need all the choice to do that kind of very innovative thing. Um, but I heard a little bit because I find that kind of dichotomy interesting. It's like I'm going to give you less of something so we can get something more. And so was I right to hear that, like, when you were sort of, because you said the blank slate of AWS versus I you implied there was like a little bit more constrained environment in the edge, and that was or did I hear wrong?
Not constrained. I would say it's if you think of like AWS, it's like, okay, what am I trying to do? Trying to build horizontal scale. Okay, cool. Is that easy? No. Like how do you do that? And even today, I'm still, been moved from Netflix for 8 some years or something like that. And it's like I still get calls all the time on team design and doing and how are you scaling it and all this other type of stuff. It's not ubiquitous, and it's because it's still kind of a black art. It's not well known, and so going then to something like this Acrobat Edge is they give you like 8 lines of code, and from an engineering perspective, it's like now I have access to this entire architecture, and all I got to do is go solve a problem. And they abstract away complexity and the sophistication in a way that an engineer appreciates for specific problems. So it's not going to solve all the problems. Like I think most of the companies that are using it, they still have presence in the cloud. And it's not like, for me, it's not like edge compute is new. I mean, I could sit here and argue about Akamai and Cloudflare and say, like, this is another flavor of that. But again, if you go back to the challenges of AWS is which region? Okay, cool. I'm going to do East. Why? Because everybody does East. All right. Well, we have 50 milliseconds of latency for people coming in from Canada or Alaska or Japan. What are we going to do? Well, we got to set up another region. Well, how's that going to work? How are we going to replicate data? It's like this is one of the ways that you could kind of solve that and still have a connection back to backend processing where it's going to be for your data scientists and your data analysts that are answering the business questions. But the customer experience is highly increased because they're constantly getting 5 millisecond or less latency. And that's what they need for their video game. That's what they need for their website. And that just that concept of like just visually and understanding architectures, that just resonates with me a lot.
No, makes sense. So any final thoughts before we do our little lightning round at the end? Anything? I mean, you've shared a lot. It's been a great conversation.
Shit that. Um, I don't know. I'm not good at lightning rounds, so I'll do my best. No final thoughts.
Um, all right. So what is one book you recommend?
Um, I like pretty much anything from Patrick Lencioni, but recently I had somebody gave me the book Leading by Heart by John Baird, I believe, and Sullivan. So I would recommend people those.
Okay. You have a podcast you listen to that you like?
Yours, of course. Um, but yeah, the security engineering podcast. I think Patrick Gallagher. I think that's a pretty interesting one.
It's called
My friend
Security
Ryan.
Engineering.
Pardon me?
That's the name, Security Engineering.
Yeah, the security engineering podcast. It's a pretty popular one. It's if you do search for it, like if you're in this, obviously engineering leadership like I am, it's got a lot of really good content. Highly rated too. And then I have a friend, Ryan Rain. He does one called Security Conversations, and he's a fascinating guy. I'm privileged to be able to call him a friend, and he's a former security guy doing a lot of investigative type of stuff. He's a former journalist. Recently left Intel to go back to kind of journalism type of stuff, and Security Conversations is a good one. And then on a personal side, I've discovered this guy, David Coggins, former SEAL, inspirational speaker, and he just says these things that are just like super relatable to me. So David Coggins would be another good one to listen to.
Okay. What about a movie, TV show?
There's so many. One that doesn't get enough press, in my opinion, is this really great show on Apple called For All Mankind. It's fantastic, and I don't think enough people know about it or watch it. Like, go watch that show. It's really great.
I've seen it up there on the Apple thing. I have not clicked on it. So
It's fantastic.
And then one more. Was it like what's a tech that you like a maybe a more obscure tech that you sort of love that you plug
Obscure tech
or something? No, something maybe something you just picked up. Something just like
I don't. I mean, the most obscure tech I have is I'm just fascinated, like on a personal note, by my Apple Watch. Like, I still just amazed that all the things it can do. And growing up as a kid, thinking about how it would have been crazy to have something like this, like pure science fiction, but it's just sitting here on my watch, and that's probably showing some of my age. But I think on a personal note, something like that is interesting. On the professional level, I just love cloud compute. If I never touch a physical system again, I'm okay with that. But just the ability to do what you can do in cloud, like all the power and the variety. Like I'm just a huge fan.
All right, that is a great answer. Both of those answers, the watch and the cloud. So
it wasn't obscure, but I love the watch.
All right, Rob, I appreciate it. This is a great conversation. I learned a lot, and it's always a piece of the puzzle I'm trying to put together in this like CTO thing. So you've added another piece to it. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, PJ. It's been fun.